I want to talk a little bit about the role that the blank slate theory plays in a lot of the social justice craziness. So I know what it means, and I think I know what it means. But maybe you can explain to those who don't know what it means what the blank slate theory is.
So the blank slate premise, or the fancier term is tabula rasa, empty slate, basically argues that humans are born with empty minds. In other words, they don't have any biological evolved blueprints that constitute some sort of shared human nature. And then it's only through the forces of the environment, socialization, your parents, advertising, your rabbi, whatever it might be, it is through those socialization forces that material is written into that blank slate. Now, of course, that is perfectly incorrect in that, yes, socialization is something that is very important. We are socialized, but we are socialized in ways that are consistent with biology. In other words, it's either biology or socialization. Socialization exists in its forms because of nature. And the reason why this is such an important debate is because a lot of people who abdicate the role of biology when it comes to human beings argue that what makes us different from the mosquito and the zebra and the lion is that they are driven by their biological imperatives, whereas humans transcend our biology. And therefore, according to that view, which is called the social constructivist view, what makes us human is that we are cultural animals. And in order to push that idea forward, you have to presume that we are born with these empty slates. There is nothing that differentiates a man and a woman a priori when they're born. They're born with equally empty slates. There is nothing that differentiates me from Michael Jordan a priori. It's only through socialization that he became the all-time greatest basketball player. Had I been hugged differently by my mother or my father, maybe I would have been the top basketball player. So it is part and parcel of a complete rejection of an innate human nature.
Sure. So the question I wanted to lead up to is, do you believe that when the social, we say that a lot of social justice warriors, and some conservatives, some Christian conservatives also have this blank slate belief. But do you think that the question that I wrote was, is the belief that humans are exclusively the product of their environment the reason why social justice warriors insist on controlling speech taking place in the environment? Is that where that impulse comes from?
Well, the general idea is that if we are all born with equal potentiality, we are all born with the same equal blank slate, then we end up at different eventual positions. I become a Nobel Prize winner, you become a crystal meth addict. Then it must be that there was something in the environment that caused this. There is no innate possible differences that might explain why I worked harder, I stayed in school longer, I'm maybe innately more intelligent than you, I'm more athletic than you. It must be something in the environment that created that unjust outcome, whereby the outcome is that some of us succeed and others fail. And therefore, there must be a way by which we should intervene on that environment to redress these injustices.
So when you see like the last, I think it was last week, the group of students shut down Christina Hoff Sommers, is it
Yes.
because they believe that her influence, she's going to mold the students in that environment into some kind of dangerous belief system, and that's why they want to intervene?
I mean, it could be partly that, but I think in their case, it's what's driving the idea that we should shut down speech that we disagree with is because their currency is hurt feelings, right? So imagine an investment banker. His or her ultimate metric is the bottom line, that I make more money today than I did yesterday. A goal scorer in soccer is, did I score more goals than the next guy? Well, in the university, it should be the unencumbered pursuit of truth that is the ultimate currency by which we all abide by. Yet, according to social justice warriors, no. It's the minimization of hurt feelings. It's the minimization of being offended. And therefore, there's a real, if you like, epistemological, existential conflict. Should the university be a place where people are coddled and their feelings are not hurt? Or should we pursue the truth irrespective of whether someone's feelings are hurt along the way? Well,
Sure.
if you believe, as the social justice warriors do, that Christina Huff Summers might show up and offer evidence that there is no systematic gender pay gap, that's going to hurt the cause of radical feminism. That's going to offend some people who hold on to that ideology. Therefore, she should be shut down.
Okay. In an instance where, like, a Christian conservative sees sexy advertisement and thinks that that's going to have a negative impact on the culture, is that an example of them engaging in that blank slate mentality and thinking that we have to get rid of those influences?
Exactly. So if you remember, I think it was Tipper Gore. Well, she's not a conservative necessarily. She was the wife, I think, of Al Gore, correct? And she. I think she was the wife of Al Gore. But anyways, there was I can't remember who she was exactly, but there was a woman who in the mid 80s went on a crusade, forgive the pun, to try to rid violence from song lyrics, right? Because the idea was that, why is it that there are now shootings all over the inner cities? It must be because of violent song lyrics. So if we get rid of, or if we somehow regulate song lyrics, then the problem would go away. Because surely until song lyrics came along, there was no recorded example ever throughout history of anybody engaging in any violence, other than the fact that all of history is paved by rivers of blood. And so it's a very facile way to try to appear as though you're solving a problem, right?
Sure.
Why is there infidelity in marriage? Well, surely it must be because of porn. Because prior to porn, everybody was perfectly loyal to one another. Nobody cheated on each other. And so it's a cognitive bias whereby people feel that because of this empty slate premise, if only I could find the environmental causative agent, causative in quote, that is causing this, and I eradicate it, if I engineer it, then the problem will go away. It's stupidity.
Sure. Let's move on to, well, a lot of these questions, like I said, are going to be directed at both your personal experience in academia and then your just kind of broad overview perspective. This is one that I came up with, I think, is if you encountered one of these social justice warrior blank slatists, I've encountered a lot of, real world moderate Democrats with blue collar backgrounds who don't engage, don't believe in this blank slate stuff. They think it's ridiculous. They think the gender is a social construction thing is ridiculous. They think all of that is ridiculous. If you were one of these people who ran in left-leaning circles, and I do in parts of my life, what would you say to a blank slate social justice warrior to convince them that there are differences between, for example, male and female brains? Like, is there something so obvious that it clicks with them and they go, oh, wait a minute, there are differences? Well, right. What would you say?
Right. So what I do here is something, so forgive me, I'll first state the term, which is a very fancy term, and then I'll explain it. So there's an epistemological approach, which I describe in one of my recent scientific papers, called nomological networks of cumulative evidence. What does that mean? Suppose I want to demonstrate some phenomenon. For example, that men have an evolved preference for the hourglass figure in women, and that hourglass figure is an adaptive preference. There are evolutionary reasons why men might hold that preference. So then the question becomes, what is the type of data that I would need to show you so that you'd be convinced of that? And the way you would do it is you would build what are called nomological networks of cumulative evidence. What does that mean? I would get data from many, many different sources. Medical data, anthropological data, psychological data, fertility data, neuroscientific imaging data. I would get data from blind men who've never seen, and yet they also exhibit the preference for the hourglass figure. So I would collect art data spanning thousands of years to show you that the statues that are depicted in art forms are consistent with that hourglass figure. So I wouldn't rely on a singular source of data to prove my point. But what I would do is I would build this network which becomes such an unassailable tsunami of evidence that you can't argue against it. Now, the original person who, or the most famous person perhaps, to ever really use this methodology, although in his time they didn't call it nomological networks, was none other than Charles Darwin. So in Origin of Species, his 1859 book, where he explained the mechanism of evolution, he didn't use a singular data source to demonstrate how evolution works. He used data from geology, from zoology, from animal husbandry, from biogeography, biodiversity. So there were many, many different data that he assiduously collected over several decades, which when you put it all together, it became incontrovertible that his theory was veridical. And so that's what I would do with these guys. If they said, well, show me that there are innate sex differences, I would hit them with so much evidence that they would no longer know which way is up, which way is down.
I'm gonna jump to a question I had for later because I think it ties in nicely here. I think even if you were to make the most compelling argument, a lot of these folks wouldn't really budge. And we've seen a lot of writing recently. Andrew Sullivan did a column on it, and more recently David French did a column comparing social justice politics or intersectionality to some kind of a faith. And I think I've heard you speak on this topic. So I think the question is, A, do you describe to the notion that social justice politics is like a faith or like a religion? And then if so, what is it about social justice politics that invites a religious-like adherence?
Right. Well, you're right that it is a form of quasi-religious belief, because the commonality between social justice, quasi-religion and actual religion is that they both start off with revealed truths. And these revealed truths are the starting point of their belief system. And those beliefs cannot be attacked or questioned. That's why they're in the realm of faith and not evidence, right? Even the most incontrovertible evidence that I can give you, like the one I just described, if new data were to come up that made me question my evidence, then if I'm an honest scientist, I have to go back to the drawing board. So even scientific truths are, quote, provisional. They are currently correct, but tomorrow they might be superseded. When it comes to social justice, it doesn't operate that way. That's why I call them all part of sort of this cancerous viruses of the human mind, right? Postmodernism, radical feminism, identity politics, cultural and moral relativism. They are revealed truths. You start off with a premise, and there is no amount of evidence that I can offer you that can alter your thinking. And that's why, in that sense, they're quasi-religions.
I think it's Jonathan Haidt who has that thing. I forget what he calls it, the sacred circle of ignorance, where there's the certain topics that remain in the bubble and they can't be.
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
And I think one of the things that makes so many people detest evolutionary psychology, the area that I study, is that evolutionary psychology is an equal opportunity triggerer, if you'd like, right? Religious people hate evolutionary theory because if evolution is correct, where is my God in the story, right? Radical feminists hate evolutionary psychology because, so you're saying that there are innate sex differences? I hate you. Postmodernists hate evolutionary psychology because, what do you mean? You're saying that there are universal truths regarding a shared biological heritage? No, as a postmodernist, I don't believe that there are any objective truths. So for all sorts of different reasons, none of which has anything to do with science, different people hate evolutionary psychology for different reasons. But what they all share in common is that evolutionary theory is attacking their pet ideological belief system.
Sure. I hear a lot. I've heard it from you. We talk about, and you can read, Foucault or any of those authors, and you get that whole sense that they don't believe in an objective truth. And there's stories about college students protesting and saying, there is obviously they don't not believe that 2 + 2 = 4, right? Or am I wrong? Do they not believe that is 2 + 2 = 4? Is that a perspective as well?
It's almost as outlandish as what you just said. By the way, I have satirized the 2 + 2 = 4 by in a satirical way, saying that I've just founded a new field called social justice mathematics. And so I played on exactly this idea, right? So for example, what do you mean irrational numbers? that's a bad term. We should not be using such terms to marginalize people and impose our patriarchal notions of rationality. You should go and check it out because I exactly satirize this kind of stupidity. There is, by the way, a field called I think feminist mathematics. It is covered in a book called Higher Superstition by Gross and Levitt, where they attack all this kind of bullshit. And feminist mathematics turns out to be the following. Let's suppose you're teaching children how to, the start of word problems. Bob is a fireman. He makes $25 an hour. Now he gets a 5% increase in his salary. How much does he now make? Well, feminist mathematics breaks down these patriarchal stereotypes, and now it's Linda is a fire person who's married to Joanne and she makes $25, right? But the math doesn't change, right? The fact that you just label stuff using transgender couples and so on, it doesn't change the math. But that's the level of idiocy that we've gotten to. I'll just give you one quick other point. You may have heard me mention this or not. This has now become a pretty famous story. About 16 years ago, well, I think it was 2002, so 16 years ago, I had gone out to dinner with one of my former doctoral students who had just defended his dissertation. We went out, myself, his date, and my wife and I. Have you heard the story before?
I don't think so.
Okay. And during the before the getting together, my former doctoral student told me, well, I just want to give you a fair warning that my date is a feminist and a postmodernist, and she's studying cultural anthropology. I said, we've hit the trifecta of bullshit. So, okay. He goes, so, just, please, professor, be cool, I said, mum's the word. I'm going to be on my best behavior. Of course, that wasn't going to happen. And so during our conversation, I said, I hear that you are a postmodernist. Yes. Do you mind if I try to propose some, what I consider to be universals, and then you could tell me how they're not universals? You could teach me how I'm wrong in my ways? She said, yes, go ahead. Okay, is it true that within Homo sapiens, only women bear children? Is that something that I could take to the bank as a human universal? So she scoffed, rolled her eyes at my disgusting materialistic stupidity, and said, absolutely not. I said, no? She goes, no. I said, so how's that? She said, well, there is a tribe off some Japanese island, some Booga Booga island, where within the spiritual realm of their narrative, within the narrative of their spirituality, their religious beliefs, it is the men who bear children. So by you restricting the definition of childbearing to the biological realm, this is how you keep us barefoot and pregnant. So after I recovered from my mini stroke, I then said, let me ask you, okay, maybe it was too controversial. My bad. It was way too contentious to presume that women bear children. Let's take one that's a bit less controversial. Is it true that within the vantage point of anywhere on Earth, sailors, since time immemorial, have presumed correctly that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west? And here she used something called deconstructionism. She said, well, what do you mean? I don't play these labels. What do you mean east and what do you mean west? What do you mean by sun? Now listen, get ready for this. That which you call the sun, I might call dancing hyena. So we don't have any reference point. I said, okay, no problem. So the dancing hyena rises in the east and sets in the west. The dancing hyena is what gives me a dancing hyena burn when I go to Caribbean island and I don't put my dancing hyena lotion. But you see the lunacy? When we can't agree about what it means to discuss the sun, and we can't agree that women bear children, yes, it is as crazy as 2 + 2 = 4.
So, you saw me laughing at that story, but is that the appropriate response, or should the response more so be concern? How influential is this mode of thinking?
Well, yeah, look, on the one hand, you should laugh against it. Mock it, ridicule it, satirize it, as I do. But I do that not just to have fun, because actually it is a very serious issue. Why? Because generations of students who could be doing a lot of valuable things with their time. They could be doing a lot of valuable things with the $60,000 that their parents are spending at the bullshit liberal arts college that they're going to, could be spent on much better pursuits. And here, by the way, I always want to clarify, I don't mean to imply that studying mathematics is impressive, but studying literature is for idiots. Not at all. All fields, as long as they are adhering to an honest pursuit of knowledge, are valid.
Sure.
So you could study art history, or you could study sociology, or you could study neuroscience. That's fine. But what makes them common, or the way that they are under a common rubric, is that they are all part of the pantheon of human knowledge. The problem with postmodernism, it's intellectual terrorism, it's anarchism, it is nihilism, it's up is down, left is right. I don't even know what up or down is. And so that to me is intellectual terrorism. It is a form of deep charlatanism, and therefore it's very serious. We should combat it, and that's what guys like me and a few others have been doing for many years now.
And I think a lot of people appreciate it, and I think you see that in your, the responses you get to the stuff when you talk about this. The views just, pile up. So let me move on a little bit,
Sure.
And we're staying in the same realm, but we're going to talk a little bit more like about the consequences of this stuff.
Sure.
I've been diving into Philip Roth's 2000 novel, The Human Stain. Are you familiar with that novel at all?
Only by name, but I've certainly not read it.
The very gist of the plot is that it's about a fictional American college professor. He teaches classics at a small liberal arts school, and there's a group of students who aren't showing up to class. They hadn't showed up since the beginning of the semester. He didn't know who they were, and he makes a remark, and he says, are these students real or are they spooks? Meaning, are they ghosts? And little did he know that the students are actually African American, and he's fired and he's ostracized. And the little twist at the end of the book is that he's actually an African American man who's passing as a Jew.
The professor is.
The professor is,
okay.
Yeah. So the whole book is about, and this was written in 2000. So it was kind of prophetic in the sense that it was really looking forward at what we were going to deal with, in the following 2 decades, and where we are right now. I guess the question that I wrote originally was, what kind of effect does this insistence on the least flattering interpretation of one's words have on the overall state of discourse on campuses? And my follow-up question would be, that story from that book, is that something that's realistic? Is that something that happens, that you've experienced either personally or have seen or heard about it online?
Sure. So let me do the first one first. What it does basically is, when you take the least charitable interpretation of someone's innocent words, is that forces people to understand that the environment is a very dangerous one, and therefore I better self-censor, right? If any syllable that I utter might be interpreted in 13,000 different ways, then the best way for me to never be feathered and tarred is to never open my mouth, right? So the next time that someone calls on me for an opinion, you know what? I won't say a thing. Multiply that exact chilling effect by 25 million voices, and you end up getting the kind of reality we have. And so, yes, it's a deep problem, right? And the reality is that very few people have the courage of their convictions, right? I mean, I stand up in any forum against anybody because I know that the only way I'm going to lose the battle against you is if you have ideas that are better than mine. And I'm so convinced about my positions that I genuinely don't think that you're going to defeat me. That's how convinced I am in my principles. Therefore, I don't feel nervous when I talk to anybody because I say, you know what, if your ideas are better, then I will lose in the battle of ideas. Most people don't come with that courageous conviction of their principles, and therefore the best way to avoid this is to keep my mouth shut, and that's really bad. Now the second question is, have I seen it? There is a book called The Shadow University by Alan Kors, and I can't remember who the second guy. Silverglate. I'm looking at my bookcase. Kors and Silverglate. One of them is, I think, the original founder of the organization FIRE. Do you know FIRE?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. So who now is being led by Greg Lukianoff, who's a friend of mine who's been on my show. In the book, he describes, I think it's maybe the opening vignette of that book, they talk about a story that happened famously at the University of Pennsylvania, where I hope I don't get any of the details wrong. We can double check it later. I think it was a sort of a Orthodox Jewish student who was living in the dorms, and there were some students downstairs or somewhere else making a lot of noise, and he was either trying to sleep or study or whatever it was. And in his vernacular, I'm not sure if it was from Yiddish or whatever it was, he sort of screamed out, stop making so much sound like buffaloes or something, not knowing that the ones who were making the sounds were African American. So it would have been okay to say buffaloes if they were Taiwanese, but it wasn't okay to say buffaloes when it was African Americans. That was somehow racist, and he got into huge sorts of trouble. That was a real case. That wasn't a fictional book called The Human Stain. And so that book really reflects reality.
Yeah. Yeah, and we see I see stories like this all the time, and a lot of people want to downplay those issues. And if you had to guess, do you think that faculty are more impacted by the silencing than students are, because it's kind of their careers and students are just kind of passing through? They're there to get their degree and leave. Is it more important for faculty?
Look, it's a great question. I would say it's hard. It's so miserable for everyone that it's hard for me to come up with a hierarchy of, for whom it's worse, because the students, yes, you're right, they're only passing through, but maybe that even makes it more important, because you've got those 4 years to shape your whole intellectual development. And if you are being denied the opportunity to both engage in the free exchange of ideas and be the recipient of the free exchange of ideas, then you really are being cheated. On the other hand, of course, professors who have to live in that ecosystem for many, many years are also damaged in that they really do walk on eggshells. I mean, you can't imagine the number of people who write to me, Tom, both students, faculty, parents of students, who basically write to me as though they're describing a reality in North Korea or in Mao China, where their kid is taking a film studies course where they have to apologize for their whiteness or whatever. And you read this stuff and you say, it is so incredible that it almost seems as though it's GAD-SAAD satire. I mean, how could we have reached this level? So I think it's a tragedy for everyone. But I should just mention this to kind of give a bit of hope. It's not as though the universities are run over by these idiots. It's just that these cretins are really the vociferous ones, right? So in the same way that it only took 19 maniacs to bring down the World Trade Center, right? I mean, we didn't need 19 million people to do this act. 19 people caused a trauma that is unimaginable. In a similar way, you don't need too many committed intellectual terrorists to poison every university. So I only mention this so that people realize that it's not as though every second university student is a rabid social justice warrior. It's just that they are the loudest ones.
That follows right into my next question. And I wrote, some commentators are quick to point out that social justice crowd is usually a small group of faculty and students on each campus. I said, although this is largely true, that small crowd is usually quite influential in shaping the political direction of their institution. So my question was, how pervasive is the social justice orthodoxy on most campuses? And two, is it exaggerated in conservative media, in your opinion?
Right. I don't think it's exaggerated. I think they are a very small minority, but an incredibly powerful one. And in what way? It only takes a few guys to hold a much larger group hostage, right? So if you know that the general zeitgeist is don't ever say a syllable out of place lest you might lose your whole reputation, all the damage is already done, right? The next time I'm going to think about speaking up at a departmental meeting or writing an email or publishing something, I'm going to have to pass it through the sieve of political correctness. And if I think that I might be on shaky grounds, then I'll shut my mouth. So it doesn't take 20 million rabid social justice warriors to destroy the environment for us. It just takes a small, committed activist community, and then we're cooked.
Sure. I mean, my personal experience, there were stories about it back in the time. I had a professor write a letter when I graduated from undergrad last year, write a letter to the campus saying that students, his words were, students should impose a steep and lasting price on me because I had invited some conservative commentators. Wow. And my politics are unbelievably moderate. And this letter, he was talking about how back in his day he used to pistol whip people like me and all these crazy violent things. And the university did nothing. They were held hostage by this crowd. And I knew it was a small group of people, but they didn't discipline him. There was no sanctions,
This is while you were a student there?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, this was, I gave a speech about this, and the speech has over like 1 million views. But I addressed it. I basically said it's unbelievable, not only that it happened, that the letter was even written and published where everybody could see it, but that the administration wasn't willing to discipline him for saying that, the words were vague, impose a steep and lasting price, but that could have either been like,
social
sanctions from my peers or something physical. So it was really vague. Wow. That was my experience. But
what were, not that anything would justify him taking that position, but what was the specific position or positions that drew that position out of him?
It was directly in response to, I had at the time hosted Milo Yiannopoulos at Bucknell University is where I went to undergrad.
Okay, so sharing that video was triggering in the same way that the Lindsay Shepard, the student sharing the clip of Jordan Peterson, was akin to her cohorting with Nazis.
Sure, and it was, Milo is a complex figure who I don't like to dive into much anymore, but in that event, he was talking about how there should be reparations for slavery, and how African American females are, intersectionality, and how they face compounded discrimination. It was really kind of a very moderate event, which reflected what I wanted at the time, and it didn't change, the backlash and this stuff that. But anyway, I have a couple more.
Sure. No problem.
So based on what we were just talking about intersectionality a little bit, I want to dive into that. And this is something that I've been trying to figure out. Maybe you could provide me some clarity. So the question that I wrote the other day, for those that don't know, if we're going to post this recording, intersectionality is it's a theory created by Kimberly Crenshaw. And what it basically means is, like I just said, if you're an African American female and you go in for a job interview, the employer might discriminate against you because you're both black and because you're a female. So there's that compounding identity of discrimination. So my immediate thing is, my question to you is, I think here's the scenario that pops into my head. What if you're a white, straight male with schizophrenia?
Right.
You still enjoy the privileges of a white male. You can go to this drugstore and get a Band-Aid in your skin color, and when you walk around on the street, you're not an other.
Right.
Why? I guess the question is, why are the intersectionality theorists so afraid of looking at individual people holistically and taking their advantages and disadvantages, and looking at them all as an individual?
I mean, I think it relates back to earlier when I talked about what is the currency that drives a particular pursuit. And I mentioned the investment banker is maximizing money, the soccer player is maximizing goals, the university setting should be maximizing truth and knowledge. Those folks, as I said, are maximizing or seeking to maximize hurt feelings, offense, victimology, right? And so I took the classic dictum, I think, therefore I am, and I updated it to I'm a victim, therefore I am, right? Or what I call collective Munchausen, right? Munchausen is the idea that I feign an illness or a medical condition so that I can garner sympathy and empathy. Munchausen by proxy is when I harm someone else who's under my care, let's say my child, because then everybody will say, oh, poor you have a sick child. It's a very diabolical psychiatric disorder. Well, I argue that the social justice warrior types and intersectionality and all this kind of bullshit, they are really parasitized by this collective Munchausen. That's how I get all my ego strokes. Am I a bigger victim than you? And therefore, anything that challenges that, if you remove some of my victimology points, You're attacking my central being, right? Now, the reason why I'm a very dangerous guy to those people, because you were talking earlier about the white guy who's got schizophrenia, that's what I call the victimology poker, right? Or oppression Olympics, right? I score very highly on those metrics, right? I'm the guy from the Middle East who escaped execution, who is differently weighted, right? Because we shouldn't say overweight. And therefore, when you put me into the algorithm of those scores, I'm probably going to beat you. I don't give a shit about what happened to you 400 years ago to your ancestors. I escaped within my lifetime, my head being unattached from the rest of my body. I win in your game. Therefore, I become a lot more difficult to attack, right? And I will use that. So I've had, I think, 2 interactions with, in both cases, they were Forbes journalists, women journalists, who we started engaging one another on Twitter. It quickly, became a bit more nasty. And because at first they said, oh, you're attacking me because you're a male, cyberbullying, whatever. Then I turned it and I said, why is she attacking the brown man from Lebanon? Why is she attacking the Arabic guy? Am I not human because I'm Jewish? Should I be invisible because I'm fat? Guess what? She couldn't handle it. Because suddenly I took the currency that she works with. It's the currency that she uses to shut down every single male who ever goes against her. And she came up, unfortunately, against a male who knows the game and outranks her in her game. And then she lost. And so how grotesque it is that that's what I should use as a ploy to make a point, rather than I have a set of positions, you have a set of positions, let's use some agreed upon methodology to decide whose ideas are better. No, I cry bigger wolf, therefore I win.
Sure. I've given a couple speeches at campuses in the past month, and I keep coming back to this term. I don't know if the term's any good, but it describes something that I keep thinking about. I call it, and I'm sure it's been called something else before, but I call it the politics of virtue. And that's the way I describe people who have political identities where their whole identity is they believe they're liberating marginalized people. That's the identity. So, where I go with that in these talks is whether it's Antifa destroying a city or a professor chastising a student, this just happened, chastising a student for saying there's only 2 genders. What is it about this whole this savior political identity that allows these people, they can act totally beyond the rules of decency and decorum that the rest of us are expected to abide by? Where do they get that license to act?
Well, I think because they start with a revealed truth that their position, however wrong or misguided it might be, is the starting correct point. There's a revealed truth that white man is evil, darker shade man is noble, right? That's what I call, by the way, the repackaging of the noble savage myth, right? So there was a movement called Anthropologists of Peace. Steven Pinker talks about it in his book, The Blank Slate, where the Anthropologists of Peace basically argued that, until white man came along and corrupted mankind, the noble savages used to walk around with leaves on their genitalia, holding hands and singing Imagine by John Lennon. Everybody made love, everybody caressed each other's hair. There was absolutely no manifestation of violence in these tribal settings until white man came along. And so what these social justice warriors are doing, they're doing exactly that, right? The immigrant, especially if he's a brown immigrant, whatever that means, especially if he's from a Muslim country, by definition starts off as being noble, right? So if you go and say, well, you know what, do we want to have a policy where we mitigate how much immigrants we allow from countries where their values are not shared by ours? Is that something that we want to talk about? No, that's racism. That's KKK. Because you're attacking a fundamental starting point, a fundamental revealed truth. I am pious. I do protect the downtrodden, the brown man. It's grotesque. It's a departure from reality. It's ugly. It's, instead of treating the individual, right? I always tell people, judge me on my merits and my flaws. I'm not Lebanese Jewish. I'm not part of the evolutionary psychology club. I'm not Lebanese first. I am Gad Saad first. So judge me for my worth, both the positives and the negatives. They don't do that. You're first a member of a group before you're an individual. It's disgusting.
Sure. to bounce off that, it seems like a lot of the influence from these groups has developed from a kind of moral manipulation. Almost like, if you're not with us, if you're not with us, you're against us, and if you're against us, you're evil. So how much of their influence do you think arises from that kind of moral manipulation, or am I overstating the role that kind of stuff plays in their influence?
I mean, I don't know exactly what you mean by moral manipulation. I think that whenever you have a faith-based system, as we talked earlier, it is impervious to countering evidence, right? So the 19 guys who flew planes into buildings did not wake up that morning and think that they were the immoral ones, right? As a matter of fact, they genuinely and truly believe that what they did was the highest form of moral expression, correct? So the social justice warriors truly believe, many of them, most of them, that what they are doing is that they are on the right side of the issue. Because again, they start off with a bunch of revealed truths that are impenetrable to a countering position. Once they are infected with that virus, which, by the way, you might have heard me mention, is what I call ostrich parasitic syndrome, right? Why do I call it ostrich parasitic syndrome? Simple, because I use the metaphor of the ostrich that puts its head down, that it's denying any reality. I could give you the tsunami of evidence to counter your position. You'll just go la 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 la. And it's parasitic because I use here the metaphor from animal speak, from biology, whereby we have many examples of brain worms or brain pathogens that once they infect an animal's brain, the animal starts behaving in a completely maladaptive way, right? So there is a particular pathogen that infects the brain of a mouse. When that happens, the mouse loses its innate fear of the cat, right? And so that's what's happening to social justice warriors. They are being infected by a very virulent set of mind viruses, which, by the way, this is the topic of my next book. And when you put all these viruses together, postmodernism, radical feminism, identity politics, and so on, that whole cocktail of pathogens creates this zombified social justice warrior. And people think that oftentimes I'm saying this sort of to be hyperbolic. I'm not. I truly am making a very sober analysis that could explain why these people are so parasitized in their thinking.
When you say mind virus, do you mean something? You mean ideas, or something we could see on a brain scan?
No, it's ideas. It's. I'm just drawing an analogy between an actual biological pathogen and a idea pathogen, where the idea pathogen, once it infects your brain, turns it into mush, right? Yeah. And here, another way to look at it is Richard Dawkins, the famous evolutionist, in 1976 in his book The Selfish Gene, introduced the term the meme, right? Which now everybody on the internet knows what a meme is. But the origins of that word is the following: in the same way that genes spread, right? Memes spread, and that's in recognition of the fact that we are both a biological and a cultural animal. So some memes are very virulent, right? For example, if we look at religion as a meme or as a memeplex, a collection of memes, Islam is a very successful memeplex. Why? Because today, 1.6 billion people have been, quote, infected by Islam. Judaism is a very unsuccessful memeplex from that metric. Only 15 million people have been infected, quote, by Judaism. So it's a metaphor, if not an analogy, for how brain pathogens can infect animal brains. Ideas can infect human brains.
Sure. All right, I have like three more. I don't want to take too much of your time.
Sure.
The first one is, I was just thinking about, I remembered, it came into my mind, when Brett Weinstein did his Tucker Carlson interview, his colleagues accused him of putting his students in danger or something like that.
Yes.
Your colleagues going to give you a hard time when this gets published?
At my university, you're saying, or colleagues in general, or
at your university?
Not in a direct way. So I won't be receiving an email from someone reprimanding me, but I'll tell you how it will have an effect. I've become pretty much invisible to some folks at my university. What I mean by that is, until 2015, I was sort of the media darling of the communications department because I'm obviously a high-profile guy. Starting around 2015, even though my platform has increased 100,000-fold, now I'm completely invisible to the university. So they don't set up any roadblocks against me. They don't actively try to do anything to at least directly harm me. But I can assure you that they certainly won't be promoting the fact that I've appeared on Breitbart. That's for sure.
Okay, that's exciting. As long as it's not going to make your life harder.
Thank you for caring.
I'm glad to. Well, I have a couple more, and these are all from my editor. So they're good questions, but these are from my editor. Just see. His first question, and I think this is one that I think a lot of people are going to be interested in hearing the answer to, is what, based on the stuff we've been talking about in this topic in general, what is your advice to? And he wants two separate answers. What is your advice to young people entering college, and then what's your advice to parents about send their kids to college?
Right.
He thinks there's two different answers there.
I mean, I would say, look, when I go to a gym, what is my objective? Well, it's to get into shape, to improve my cardiovascular abilities, to get more muscle tone. So different endeavors have different ultimate objectives. What is the objective of university? Well, it's certainly to acquire a knowledge base in some field. I mean, there is something to learning of what is economics, what is accounting, what is neuroscience. But more generally, it is how to think, right? How to develop the neuronal circuitry to engage in critical thinking. How do you build arguments, as we discussed earlier? How do you try to convince someone of your position? How to think? So there are sort of two general objectives to a university education. It's being a well-rounded person, developing an expertise in a field, but more broadly learning how to think. So I would say, don't worry about going into this field or that field because the market says that this field is hot or not, or it has better job prospects. Just make sure that you pursue something that you're passionate about and that honestly trains you to be a well-rounded, good thinker. Now, you could achieve that through learning about Shakespeare, and you could achieve that by doing microeconomics, very different things. But at least you are in the pursuit of knowledge and of a cerebral life. So therefore, when they come to you, your kids, and say, I'd like to study critical race theory and intersectionality and bullshit 101 whiteness, then you say, yeah, well, then you're going to pay the $60,000 because I'm not going to pay the money that I have amassed through my hard work for you to be polluted learning about nihilistic, academic fields that are intellectual terrorism. So I don't have any, if you like, advice in terms of go into that field or that field. Just be honest in your intellectual pursuits. I'll just mention this. When I went in my undergrad, I knew that I was very good in two things in my life, in soccer and in my academics. And I always thought that I would be a professional soccer player and eventually I would be a professor. Because of injuries and other life events, I wasn't able to fully pursue my soccer career. And so I went into what I also knew I was going to be, which was a professor. As I was thinking about what to do for my undergrad, I was very talented in many different disciplines, but I thought, okay, if I'm going to become a professor one day where all my life is going to be pursuing a cerebral life, then what's going to be the thing that trains me the best? And I thought that mathematics and computer science, right, the purest of fields, it's not that I thought that I would become a mathematician eventually, but I thought that given my objective, which was ultimately to be a professional thinker, a scientist, then the first degree should be very, very pure, mathematics. So that was my thought process, right? Someone else might have a different thought process, but just do something that trains your mind how to think. Don't do activism.
Sure. Okay, so I have two more.
Sure.
The first one's from the editor, and the last one is going to end up one with me. His question, and it was more just like a blurb than a question, so I'm going to do my best. My politics personally are like right down the middle, and I feel like my personal politics are almost irrelevant to my kind of like attempts to bring light to the stuff we're talking about. But the question, and I think it'll be appropriate to the Breitbart audience is where does someone who is moderate go on a college campus? Because if you're a moderate like I am, you're going to get lumped in with the far right. So what would you say to someone who's in the middle, who says I don't like Trump, or I don't like I don't want to be associated with people or on the far right or just conservatives, even though they're going to they're going to get put into that group. I'm constantly put into that group because of where I write and some of my political history. I'm sure you've been lumped in with people you probably don't politically align with. So I guess the question he's asking is, how do you find that middle ground, that moderate ground, when there isn't one, and what do you think of this forced alliance between people who are maybe moderately right of center and people who are farther to the right?
So I'm going to try to answer it this way, and I hope I'm tackling your question. I think it's a bad idea to try to belong to a group. So, for example, many people, I could just go on the internet right now and I could find probably 20,000 sites where someone is trying to guess what my political orientation is. I'm a man of ideas. So I belong to the tribe of truth, right? Or at least as best as I can, as honestly and as assiduously as I can pursue the truth using the scientific method and logic and reason. So I don't belong to the right group. I don't belong to the left group. I don't belong to the centrist group. I belong to the group of ideas and truth. So, and again, that goes back to an earlier point that we made when I said, look, what allows me to do what I do is because I'm very confident about the conviction of my principles, right? So I understand that the young undergrad may not have the same confidence, but I would say that's how you approach life. Don't try to belong to the young Republicans or the left red-wigged social justice warriors. Come with your ideas, with conviction, with evidence, and belong to that group. So, for example, I'll be very specific in giving an example. People have a hard time positioning me because I'm someone who is anti-open border policy, right? I'm for the death penalty. If you've raped, sodomized, and decapitated 18 children, I really have zero moral problems with executing you. As a matter of fact, I think it's barbaric to not have that penchant. Okay. Now, if I just told you those two positions, boy, I sound like I'm a right-wing nut. On the other hand, when it comes to all sorts of social issues, I'm probably about the most liberal guy that you could imagine. I don't care what you do as a transgender person. I don't care about gay marriage. Go for it. So on many things, I would be defined as the epitome of a liberal guy. And on other things, I would be considered as a hawkish guy, right? Well, why? Because I have this thing here in my head called the brain. And that brain allows me to take each individual point and form an opinion. So I don't belong to right or left. I belong to truth.
Sure. Let me follow up real quick on that because I found that fascinating. You mentioned one thing about not being a college Republican. One of the things that I've kind of come to in my political development is this whole idea that I felt like being on a team was really harmful because I think that's where the bad arguments come from. Where if you've decided, okay, I'm pro gun control and I have to be because I'm on this team, and then if you get into the public sphere at all, the stakes go higher. I've referred to this in talks as the paradox of the public intellectual, where you're expected to defend a certain position, and there's an incentive to defend that certain position. It makes it that much harder to be self-critical. Is there any truth in that?
Well, I think that by not belonging to a team, then in a sense you end up offending almost everyone at some point for a position that you've taken, right? So, for example, and I call it, I can't remember what the term I use, but, I used to love you, Gad Saad, but now I hate you because, and then fill in the blank, right? So if recently I had the most dangerous group in the world, even more dangerous than Islamists, they're called the Vegan Rage Brigade. They came after me. Why? Because even though I'm someone who is unbelievably, pathologically compassionate in my love for animals, I do eat meat. And I do eat meat because I recognize that it is very difficult, given our evolutionary history, to only eat tofu and celery. Now, somebody's going to get upset at that, right? We haven't evolved to only eat tofu while listening to Imagine by John Lennon, right? And I gave a sober presentation on my channel of the endless amount of evolutionary evidence for that.
Sure.
Well, guess what? Tons of vegans who, had posters of me in their bedroom because I was their hero, suddenly I became substantially more disgusting and vile than Hitler, right? Hitler was profoundly nicer because, he loved the dogs, and therefore I was below him. So I hate this type of thinking, right? Obviously, there is no way that every position that I take, you and I are going to agree on. That's good. That means we have individual personhoods, independent personhoods. So yeah, forget about camps. Just develop the critical thinking that allows you to defend with alacrity all of your positions. That's it.
Sure. I got one more, and it's going to be a weird question to end on.
Uh-oh.
But I love this topic, and I feel like if I can crack this code, then I can crack all of social justice. And the topic is the fat acceptance movement. Because I feel like it hits all of the social justice things. It's about, how everything's a social construction, how in reality, if we lived in a different society, people who were 600 pounds would be beautiful.
Yes. I discussed this, by the way, in The Consuming Instinct, but go ahead. In one of my books, go ahead.
I'm not even going to go anywhere direct with it, but just what do you think of it, and what do you think it says about social justice politics, and why is it significant? It feels significant. I'm not sure why.
Right. So, look, that's one of the reasons why people hate evolutionary theory, by the way, because if you say that there are certain realities that define why men prefer this type of woman, why women prefer this type of men, and if on those metrics I don't score well, and I can't apparently improve on those metrics, then I can do one of two things. I could either take that to heart and actually see if I can improve. I mean, when it comes to weight, you could go and lose weight, right? But it is a lot easier to say no. There is no evidence that overweight people are more likely to succumb to various diseases. There is no true evidence that men don't like 800-pound women. This is just a social construction imposed by the arbitrary standards of the patriarchy, right? Well, by the same token, tons of lazy, apathetic, useless guys who play video games in their mom's basement 24 hours a day could say, gee, I wonder if I'm not getting any luck with the ladies because all I do is play video games. I never finished high school, and the last time I took a shower was in 1973. And maybe that's what explains why I don't have sex with any women. No, it can't be that. It must be the evil matriarchy that's imposing these standards whereby women are attracted to high status men. So that's exactly what ostrich parasitic syndrome, that's exactly what denialism is, right? You deny reality because it strokes your ego. So what the fat acceptance movement is doing is saying the following. And again, I could get away with it because I say, hey, wait a minute, I weigh over 200 pounds and I'm not a tall guy. Therefore, you can't attack me because I'm fat just like you, right? So the reality is, being overweight, all other things equal, is not good for your health. So you could do two things. You could either try to lose weight, which is going to involve you watching what you eat and exercising, or you could say all this bullshit that the fat acceptance people say. So it's a way to be lazy. Lazy in what sense? Lazy in that you don't try to improve on those metrics. Look, I've actually joked with my own physician when he tells me, hey, God, you're in very good health, but, if you could lose 25, 30 pounds, that's going to be great. And then I usually joke with him, satire. I say, whoa, why? This is fatism. You have no right. Weight is a social construct. As a matter of fact, I had tweeted that one of these things, and he had read it, and he actually hadn't picked up that it was satire. So when I went to visit him for my yearly checkup, he actually was wondering about my mental health. He said, well, I've noticed a couple of your tweets here. And I looked at him, I said, I won't say his name. I said, Dr. X, I'm being satirical. He goes, okay, good. So the bottom line is that it's a way to protect my ego. I either have to go through the very hard work of improving on that metric, or I can argue that it's only a imposed arbitrary thing, and therefore I could go about being fat. It's silly, and it's counterproductive, and it doesn't help the individual.